Clearly, Netanyahu is trying to take advantage of the fact that Biden is basically out of function. Whether he's mentally dysfunctional or just an extreme lame duck is perhaps debatable for those of us who can't really know hour to hour, but he's not functional as president. So Netanyahu's calling the shots for the U.S. military. Whatever Netanyahu does, the United States stands up and supports. And Netanyahu is an absolutely murderous person running a violent, extremist, murderous government. And he has the weight of the U.S. military behind him. It's interesting to note that all last week, the new president of Iran was speaking peace. And this is no doubt what led Netanyahu to escalate war. Netanyahu doesn't want peace. He wants dominance by Israel. He doesn't want negotiations. He doesn't want diplomacy. He wants dominance. And the U.S. is backing him every bit right now. And so he's taking advantage of that. It depends on the U.S. If Israel runs the United States, as seems to be the case, it probably ends in a regional bloodbath, because Israel would like to provoke the United States to a war with Iran. That could turn into World War III. I don't think Israel seems to care that much about that. If the United States acts like a sovereign country and actually tells Israel that Israel does not control the U.S. military, the war could end any time. This is not in the U.S. interest whatsoever, anything that Israel is doing. In fact, you even hear almost cries for mercy from Biden, as pathetic as they are. Oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't escalate here. We actually hear that because what Israel is doing is absolutely not in the interests of the United States, nor does it have the approval of the American people. But Israel, at the moment, calls the shots. It controls the Congress through large campaign funding. It has several senior people in the administration like Blinken or Hochstein or others who basically do what Israel asks. And this is the drama. I often say that the job of the United States president, the true job, is to stop the war machine. But clearly we don't have a functioning presidency right now. The U.S. Either knows or is so profoundly and grossly incompetent that it's unbelievable. Israel uses U.S. intelligence. Israel notifies the U.S. Of what it's doing. The U.S. knows. If it doesn't know, oh my God, help us, because the U.S. enables all of it with the munitions, with the intelligence, with the financial support. And so I don't know which is more horrendous, that the U.S. knows and it gives a green light, which I think to be the truth, or that the U.S. doesn't know and it gives a green light, which would be adding a shocking degree of incompetence. What is Israel's goal? Israel's goal is like the map that Netanyahu showed at the UN, which is so-called Greater Israel. From the river to the sea. That's not the that's not the Palestinian chant. That's the Israeli reality. That's what they want. They want to control millions of Palestinians, either through apartheid or ethnic cleansing or slaughter. They're doing all three right now. And that's their basic goal. The other basic goal is to dominate the region as the nuclear superpower that can do what it wants, where it wants, when it wants. And so that's the behavior of Israel. The United States is the complicit partner in all of this. it's not in America's interest, as I emphasize. It's isolated America diplomatically. It is actually leading to an acceleration of the shift of power to Russia, to China, to others, because the U.S. It gives away all standing in the world for the sake of Israel's bizarre ambitions. This isn't strengthening Israel. This is strengthening the United States. This is isolating the United States. Nor does any of this, whether in the Middle East or in Ukraine, make the U.S. more secure. We're just heading towards nuclear war the way we're going because we have such a dim-witted leadership that does the bidding of reckless extremists, both within the U.S. government and of these states, which, for whatever reason, get to use the U.S. military as their private convenience. So this is really a terrible situation, and I don't see it. I can see how it could get better immediately by a president that was alert and doing his or her job. But whether it will is quite another matter, because our politics are deeply broken in the United States. The American people have no say in anything. They don't hear any truth in anything. They have no say in anything. It's not like this election is going to decide anything about this. It's not like we hear any real information about any of this. Everything is lies anyway, because the American people are not invited to participate in such life and death decisions. The basic fact of the Ukraine war is that it's a war between the United States and Russia. This is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. The United States has tried during the past 34 years, I date it to 1990, when the U.S. told a lie to President Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, at which point Gorbachev not only gave his assent to German reunification, but disbanded the Warsaw Alliance or military pact, which was the Soviet alliance. The United States, since that time, has done everything possible to surround and to weaken Russia, even to dismember Russia. And this has pitted the U.S. And Russia in a increasingly violent, direct conflict. It's terrifying. Both sides have 6,000 nuclear warheads. The United States is led by a cabal, the so-called neocons, whose purpose for more than 30 years has been to weaken or dismember or decolonize Russia, whichever term one wants. And the rhetoric is just out of control. The Cold War was far less dangerous than this almost all the time. We had actually agreements, summits, negotiations. Part of this is that Biden is singularly a disastrous president. Part of it is the Democratic Party is completely suborned by the military-industrial complex, so it became the war party, shockingly, though both parties really deserve that moniker. I wouldn't put too big a difference, but the Democrats are even more warmongering than the Republicans. And seems to be the purpose of the United States to do what it can to continue the war, to provoke, to pledge everything that needs to be done. Kamala Harris is right up there when she met with Zelensky. We're going to support you. This is vital. You have to win, and so forth. The whole point of this war from the start has been that the U.S. has been pushing NATO, pushing U.S. missile systems, pushing the U.S. military into Russia's not only backyard, basically its front yard. And it's extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily dangerous. We don't hear a word of maturity from Washington, from anybody right now in Washington. I don't know where any grown-ups are at all in Washington. They just are stupider and more dangerous than the next one. Although almost nobody rivals Lindsey Graham, but still, it's pretty much across the board right now. You just don't hear a voice that tells the truth. Now, on this particular issue, Trump and Vance come a lot closer to telling the truth than Harris does, and Biden is, again, we don't know whether he's even functional anymore, but we can know for sure that Blinken has been a warmonger from the first moment, way out of his depth, in my view. Maybe, as we're hearing from some channels, maybe Lloyd Austin and the Pentagon are somehow putting on some brakes on some of this because the political side is so feeble and without control. Maybe this is just what we're hearing. So we do hear that seemingly the Pentagon told Biden, no, American systems, logistics, hardware, intelligence, satellite data, ground systems cannot be used to target deep inside of Russia, because that indeed would be so provocative as to potentially lead to nuclear war. Maybe it's true that that came from the Pentagon. Maybe it's true that Biden therefore followed this. I say maybe because I also don't recall a time, and again, I may be forgetting so many things, when we don't hear really a word from the President of the United States. I think we're drifting until January 20th, but the drift is very dangerous right now. Look, so Zelensky is a professional actor and a comedian with no knowledge, history, or international experience. Before becoming president of Ukraine, he was put up by one of the oligarchs because of a television show. It is reality following fiction to an extent that one cannot believe. He's the last person in the world I would listen to about whether Russia is or isn't going to use nuclear weapons. He doesn't have a clue, and he has no knowledge, no history, no context at all. And he should not be manipulating. What we also do seem to know is that the UK is more warmongering than when it was the British Empire. Of course, some habits never go away, so it's preposterous to see this country that's falling apart internally being the great world empire saying, oh, of course we go to war, of course we strike deep inside of Russia and so forth. Really pathetic. Starmer's approval ratings in the UK are plummeting like nothing we've ever seen, because he's pathetic. He's just come in. I'm sorry to make that conclusion, but his country barely functions right now. The National Health Service barely functions right now. So what's his primary responsibility? To push the U.S. towards nuclear war with Russia. That's what he thinks. You know, I think it's important for people listening in to listen to a quotation from John Kennedy, President Kennedy, from 61 years ago. And I just want to give a word of context to it and then make this point. President Kennedy had an experience that only two people in the whole world have ever had. That's himself and Nikita Khrushchev, when they held the fate of the world in their hands as two individuals at the most perilous moments of all of human history in October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And because both of them were remarkable people, not automatons, not fools like we have in Washington right now, not stupid people on the political take, but people who wanted to save the world, they actually did save the world. Both of them, I want to stress, because they compromised, they used diplomacy, they were scared to death, they were told by their advisors to do things that would have ended the world, and they pulled back from the brink. And in the middle of the following year, in 1963, on June 10, 1963, President Kennedy gave a speech that I regard as the finest speech perhaps ever by an American president, but certainly of the modern presidency. And it came to be called his peace speech, and it was a prelude to Kennedy and Khrushchev signing the partial nuclear test ban treaty in July 1963. And Kennedy said many things about how the two sides needed to make peace, but he also, in one short statement, encapsulated the lesson of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I just want to read it. He said, "Above all, while defending our own vital interests, national nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world." Now, above all, and that's a very important statement, because the whole speech has many important things to say, but Kennedy summarizes, above all, avoid confronting an adversary with the choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. Now, is that what we're doing with Russia every single day? We are taunting Russia. We're saying, Putin's a fool. He's crazy. He has to retreat. So either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. Yes, we're making that confrontation every day. Kennedy's main message from the Cuban Missile Crisis was, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to that choice. And he says to do so would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. Well, U.S. policies are bankrupt. This is the basic point. It's a disgrace. It's a shame that we're pursuing this rhetoric. We're pursuing this smirking attitude. We have the CIA director telling us, oh, don't worry about nuclear war. When Biden said, oh, we may be on the path to nuclear Armageddon, all the mainstream media chastised him the next day. Oh, you're not supposed to talk like that, Mr. President. Don't make people nervous just before they're all dead in a nuclear war. Well, come on. Of course we should be nervous, because we don't see grown-ups in positions of responsibility right now sitting and negotiating a way out of this confrontation. That's what this is about. And it's, especially if you know the roots of this confrontation, which is that this was U.S. design and U.S. provocations for 30 years, the irresponsibility of this is even larger. Of course, everything I'm saying is treated as propaganda right now in the Western media. You can't say this, but the Western media is hiding every fact or is ignorant of every fact, because these are plain facts over the last 30 years. The diplomats know it. The historians know it. I know it from having been around for the past 30 years. And I know when the mainstream media are lying, and I know when our government is not speaking the truth to us. And we're not playing a game. This is not a board game. This is not a game of Risk. This is not a game of poker. This is not wondering whether it's a bluff or not a bluff. How stupid can we be to even use this kind of language? I hope people watched that discussion. It was a lot of fun. And I like John so much and respect John. And we've been friends and colleagues in a way for a very long time. So it was a good discussion. And John helped us to understand the Ukraine war from the first moments in 2014 and has done a magnificent job in that. You know, it's not absolutely clear to me why we disagree on China. My basic point is China's not a threat. And I know China very well, both through dozens or maybe hundreds, I don't know the count, of visits over the last 43 years. So many students, so many colleagues, so many research papers, so much reflection on this. China's not a threat. China has not invaded any overseas country in its history. I'm talking not about history since 1776 like the United States. I'm talking about history since 221 BC. I'm talking about China's statecraft for more than 2,000 years. So people should understand this fact. John and I also agree. I've followed John in this. He says the oceans protect us. The great powers are not a threat to each other, except if we stumble into nuclear war, because you cannot project power across the Pacific and threaten the security of the United States. China does not threaten the United States, period. It doesn't. And China's rise has been good for the United States, not bad for the United States, and good for the world, not bad for the world. So these are basic points. The only way it's bad is if you're playing the board game Risk. And the goal of the game is to have your pieces on all places on the board. Well, that's a board game. That's unfortunately the game that's played by the neocon crazies, sorry to use the term, but these delusional people in the United States who think the United States runs the world. We're 4.1% of the world population. China's 10 times older than the United States. It's a great civilization. We do not run China. We're not going to run China. China doesn't have to look like the United States, doesn't have to have a government system like the United States. And I wish the United States had a different political system that actually functions now rather than as a plutocracy. But that's a topic for another discussion. But my point is, it's delusional to think that the United States calls the shots for the world. But if we try to do that, if we try to make Taiwan a centerpiece of our foreign policy, we're likely to get the world blown up. And so this is the big mistake. It goes back now really 33 years to 1991 when these neocons and even it was the George Bush Senior administration, I'm talking about Wolfowitz, Cheney, and others, started to concoct this vision of the U.S. as the unrivaled sole superpower in a unipolar world where the U.S. has full spectrum dominance and all these other delusions of grandeur. This has been nonstop war since then, and this is what motivates the animus for no reason with China.